I am very animated about virtually everything. And he is very steady and very calm. And his happy dance looks very different.
I can be a little bit reactionary. And I can just spit out the first thing that comes to my mind. But yeah, he keeps my ups and downs on a much more even keel.
I can get worked up. And because he's calm, he balances me out. And he will thank me for being talkative, that when we go to a party, he doesn't have to talk to people.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile. Yeah.
This is Behind Our Smiles
Pursuing connection,
and finding joy.
even in the struggle. And welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles podcast. This is Tara Buchanan, and today I kicked Joe out of the studio, and it's time for just the ladies to talk. So this is going to be a fun episode, and this is going to be a different episode than we've done before. I am surrounded by only ladies.
Hello.
Hi.
So the point of this episode was getting together some of my favorite ladies who are similar to me and whose husbands are kind of similar to mine. So I feel a very level good connection here. And the theme around this is we're all verbal processors.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've got
Okay.
things to say.
Absolutely.
processors.
It all,
Real
has to,
words.
it all has to be said.
Okay.
Yes,
So this
twice.
is going to be fun. So let me go around the room first and introduce you to my verbal processing friends. So first I have Hope. Now you may remember Hope from episode 96. She was on with her husband, Larry, talking about budgets and marriage. And she has a YouTube channel, Under the Median. So Hope, tell us about your husband. And I want to ask you to do it in 3 words, if you can do that.
Kind, quirky, but in like a really super good way, like a very cool way.
You're ready past 3 words, Hope.
No, you said that was the 2 words. Kind, quirky, considerate.
Ooh,
Nice
very
one.
good. And how long have you been married?
36 years.
Fabulous. And next we have Jennifer Sakata, and she and her husband were guests on our podcast as well on episode 130, and they shared some of their marriage journey. How would you describe your husband, Craig, in 3 words?
Does it count if I use a hyphenated word?
Okay.
Can that be one word?
You can hyphenate.
It's
I'll
true.
letter. I'll letter this
Okay,
time.
thank you. He's servant-hearted. I know this is another phrase, hidden gem,
Ooh,
and steady.
I like it.
And we've been married 18 years,
Fabulous.
discovering the beauty of all of that.
And lastly, we have my friend Kristy, and she is on the air at WCIC on the weekend, so she is a talker as well. Tell us about your husband, Greg, in 3 words.
I would say humble, smart, and funny.
Very good. So we got, the cool thing is our husbands are all similar, but they're, of course, all very unique. My words were steady, kind, and thoughtful, but I like all of your ones to the considerate part. Our husbands are very much similar like that. So this was a crazy idea I had, which was get a whole bunch of talking ladies in the room to talk about our husbands who don't talk nearly as much as we do. So it might get a little crazy, but we're going to work really hard at not like getting completely out of hand. And I think this is probably a common dynamic. I think I have a lot of friends in the same dynamic where we have very talkative, extroverted wives who want to do all the things, and our husbands are just the opposite of that. So we're going to share kind of some of our experiences and how we've grown through the experiences and learning to love our husbands well. I think that's a challenge for many of us. So whoever wants to jump in now, this is going to be a free-for-all. Whoever can talk about when you first met your husband, those differences that you first saw.
Well, I was very straightforward with Larry when I met him that I was interested. And so I was handing him my phone number and saying, use it. And he was taking time to actually think about whether he wanted to be in a relationship. I was 7 years younger, so that was part of it. He was like, oh no, she's awfully young. And so he was at a whole different stage of life than I was because he was 25. And I think it took me a little while to figure out that he wasn't not interested. It's just that he wanted to be very sure that he wanted to move forward before he moved forward. So it took months. I'm not joking. I was like a friend and nothing more for a long time before he finally said, okay, now I think I'm ready.
So it was that thoughtfulness, not verbal processing. He didn't have to talk to you about it.
Well, because I would ask him to talk to me about it. Like, so where are we at here? And he was like, so I'm still thinking about this. And, I guess he figured that when he got it figured out, he'd let me know. But in the meantime, he was still very kind, very thoughtful. We spent a lot of time together, like doing friend things, nothing romantic at all for months and months. Well, I waited not so patiently, asking him like where we were at.
So you're like, let's go get it. I know what I want. And he's like, I just got to sit and chill.
Yeah.
And think about this for a while.
Yeah.
Any other dittos in the room?
My husband and I, our story's a little different.
Okay.
We met online, and so I got to see his profile first. And so I got to see a glimpse of who he was through his writing, and he's very good at writing, and so I could see that he was loyal, and he was humble in his writing too. So a lot of it I saw, and I knew deep down I was going to marry a quieter guy. And so when I saw his profile, and it really came across, like I said, humble.
You knew he was quiet though, even though he was online?
He's an engineer, so I kind of saw some clues. But yeah, we have a lot in common, and that was nice. But he's quick to listen. So I could talk, but he would contribute, and that was important.
And what was the biggest difference you noticed right away, even over online dating?
He's a processor too, like Larry, that there's times I have to kind of float it by him. And at first, I just liked the idea of me being able to talk all the time. And then when him being silent, I wasn't ready for that as much.
I wonder, like,
throwing an idea out and
over
waiting.
email, it's different because email allowed him to process something.
Oh yeah,
back.
we'd purposely wait every other day to message.
Now, how does that work in real life now that you're married?
I have to message him at text or work and then give him some time. And I will. So like, for example, he had a milestone birthday a few years ago, and I brought it up early. What would you like for your birthday? Would you like big party, dinner with me? Tell me. And I would just casually bring it up as it got closer. So he knew I was thinking about him, but I wasn't planning it for him. And once he said party, then I planned it.
Oh, wow. He wants a party. I love it. Okay, Jennifer, how about you? First differences you noticed with Craig?
Somewhat similar to Hope's, but not quite as long a period of time. We spent a lot of time hanging out, spending time together, and we dated long distance for most of our courtship. And like Kristy, we did a lot of emailing. And this was back in the day before we had cell phones at the ready. So most of our communication was honestly through the computer. And so on paper, we had plenty of time to go back and forth. But what I noticed first was a situational noticing. I was doing a pastor's internship at our church, and so I was in the front, learning as much as I possibly could, and he was in the back, behind the scenes, working the soundboard, making sure that everybody had what they needed. And so I'm quite content in front of people, as the more the merrier, and he is quite happy when he is in the back all by himself.
Now, was that attractive to you, though? Like,
it was, quite honestly. I distinctly remember a time when the bulb went out on our projector in the middle of a service. So imagine this. It's our pastor is preaching. It's the middle of the service. The projector has gone out, and it's an important part of her sermon and presentation. And my husband, Craig, literally pulls a ladder onto where she's preaching behind her very quietly, climbs up the ladder, changes the bulb. Nobody knows anything differently because he has very quietly exited stage left. Everything's been taken care of, and on she goes with her sermon. And I watch this man as he walks back to the soundboard thinking, how did he do that so seamlessly?
he didn't want applause?
He did not. Where I would have done a dance, I'd have been dancing on the ladder, coming up with all kinds of fun jokes or things to say. It was quite attractive to me, largely because it was something I couldn't fully relate to. Very different than I am. And so, but it was also that servant-hearted. That was my hyphenated word, is that my husband is deeply servant-hearted. And that was immediately attractive to me. Now, fast forward in our marriage, I love that he is servant-hearted. His love language is acts of service. My love language is not. My love language is words. Surprise, right? And so sometimes those don't always translate with one another. And so this beautiful difference between us becomes a difficulty because we struggle to communicate in a way that the other person could understand and receive well.
Hope, how about you? When you first got married, how did some of those differences cause conflict or tension?
The big thing I think that I noticed immediately, because I am a verbal processor, I've got to say it all. And Larry doesn't have to. He would say something, he'd make a statement, I'd be like, oh, I wonder what he really means. And I would attach a meaning to it that he was like, where are you coming up with this from?
I wonder what he really means.
And it took me a while to realize that, I mean, the Bible says something about a man without guile, and that really is Larry. Like, he has no hidden agenda ever with anything. And it took me a while to really understand that about him, and to realize that when something hit me, you know, like he would say something that would hit me the wrong way, I'd think, no, wait a minute. Before you verbally say something to him that you might regret, you need to take time to remember that he always has the best interest at heart, and he probably does not mean what you think he just meant. And I needed to learn to take the time to say, can you tell me more about like what you meant when you said that? Because I'm feeling like I'm not understanding it the way you probably meant it.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. He probably means what he says. I mean, what I just said. There's got to be more to it, because when I say something, I'm like, I've got 4 sentences I didn't say. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, where's the rest of it? There's got to be more to it
all
than
there
that,
is.
right?
So how about you, Kristy? What are some of the early ways that those differences cause a little bit of havoc? Or
Well, hearing her speak
conflict?
reminded me that one thing I liked about my engineer-minded husband was that I liked, if we were talking, I'd be like, oh, tell me more. Tell me more. And it didn't bother me because I was intrigued with him, and I had a lot of time. Kids now, I don't have as much energy, but at the time, it just was natural. Anyone else, I'd be like, this is not as much fun. But with him, I wanted to know him as much as I could. And so if he'd say something, I'd be like, tell me more. I'd have 4 things ready to say, dig deeper.
20 questions.
But now there's times where he'll say something and I wait, and I'm like, maybe he'll just tell me. And I wait, and then I'm like, nope, I got to dig in deeper the way I did before, because I do care about him and I want to learn about him still. And it does come natural for the most part, but there are times where I'm like, oh, it'd be nice if he just told me more.
Does he have a limit on questions? Like, in your head, you're going, this is how many questions I got.
You know, I've never tested the theory, but I am positive it's probably 3.
Okay. See, I mean, I think to myself, if I want to ask my husband something, I'm like, I've got 3 questions. I got to pick the most important things, because after 3 questions, he might be done.
I think so.
I think that's kind of fair.
For me, it's like I can ask the 3 questions, but he doesn't allow for the sub questions that go under. It's like 3
ABC.
main. What I meant was 3 main questions, and there may be sub
each
questions
main
under
question
the 3. Yeah,
has
it's got to be
answer.
just 3.
And then when you throw into that mix being a verbal processor, you think as you're speaking. And so for an internal processor, he's waiting for the period at the end of the sentence, which is, you know, a good 7 to 10 minutes in. And I'm figuring out quite clearly what it is that I have to say and thinking. And meanwhile, he was still back at sentence number 1 wondering, am I supposed to respond to that? So it leaves for some interesting conversations. And I loved what you said, Kristy. I think we have to step back sometimes and simply ask not an abundance of questions, but to stop long enough to ask, what are you hearing? Or how is this landing for you? And I think that's a gracious gift, right? That we can give as verbal processors, that we can give to internal processors. It's that space to be able to process what came so clear to us, but they're still thinking about.
Well, it's funny, even talking to you all, we have a little bit of like talking over each other. We're kind of bouncing things off, you know, and my lady friends and I, we can pull off that way. But you know, my husband is so polite and kind. So in my way, I'm kind of expecting him to interrupt me. Like, if you have a thought, you just come and tell me what you got. So I'll go, and get 8 minutes later, he's like, where's that first question? He's like, I kind of forgot the first question because I was just listening to you. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm like, interrupt me. It means like you're following, you know? So he's like, I'm listening, you know? Think about the things that we love about our husbands. And then again, in marriage, not so much. And the things we love, we no longer love as much, you know? And it's almost like, God, make him more this way, make him more that way, when we know that's not the way God made him. So if you would answer that question, finally you're in the marriage, and this is the man you married, and you're like, man, I just wish, God, you make him more this. And what for you, maybe in the back of your head, you kind of hoped he would be that he was not. Did you ever have that moment of like wishing, or am I the only one?
Oh, no, you're not the only one. I mean, one of the things that I remember absolutely loving about first meeting Craig and when we were dating is how patient he was and is with me. Yes. And I absolutely loved that he could sit in a space for a very long time. I just shared about my verbal processing. Sometimes he would be that patient. But then when it comes to we've got children and we've got deadlines and we need to get to a ball game or we need to get dinner on the table, I'm wanting him to move just a little bit faster. I love that about him then, but in the movement of life, which for me is often very fast, I want him to move as fast as I am. But were I to force that, and when I force that, what I lose is the beauty that his patience brings.
That we totally have that as well. Where I'm like, can you just tell him to hurry up?
One of the things I think with Larry is that when we were dating, I was fascinated by how detail oriented he was. Like he would have, he didn't go camping on the weekend. He had a typed out list of every single thing he needed to take because he thought deeply about everything. I would be like, hey, let's just get in the car and let's just go. And so it took me a while to figure out, especially when I would come up with these ideas, which I thought were brilliant. I was hey, let's do this. And for us really, because we talk about finances all the time on our YouTube channel. And it's because I spent so much time looking at the numbers and trying to figure out what we were going to do. And I'd come up with this idea and he'd say, you have to show me on paper, because he had to process, he had to see it in front of him, and he had to know not just that I'd come up with this great idea, but that I understood there had to be some sequential steps clearly in between where we were at and where I thought we wanted to be or needed to be. And ultimately, it helped me, I think, to be better at what I wanted to do, because he made me slow down long enough to consider the steps. And he still does that. He's like, great, this is a great idea. But now I've learned to come to him the first time with steps written out.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned that. I've had a similar experience with Joe. And I think when I have the idea and all that, part of me was like, I don't want to worry about the steps. I want you to be excited with me about what we're doing. So I think that's sometimes a misconception too, that they're asking for the practical, implementation versus just hear me in my new idea, So how about you, Kristy? What would you wish your husband was more or less of in the less mature
So he is
phase?
also very patient and very calm. And and one thing, I had a lot of friends in high school and college, guys and girls, and I was always kind of drawn to the louder guy, but I knew I'd marry the quiet one because I didn't want to compete talking. And yet there was times where I was like, okay, Greg, come on, give me some more energy. Give me a little more, and he'd just be like, yeah, I really like that gift you got me, but I needed him to tell me 5 times he liked the gift. So I have to remember that when he says something, he meant it. And I've had to really let that sink in, that I've noticed his facial expressions more than the words. So if I give him something and I spend a lot of time making it, he'll kind of slow down, look at me, and I can see a twinkle in his eye, and he's like, thank you. And that's all I'm going to get. And I need to be okay with that because I know him and I know what that means to him. And so that's something I've kind of learned of what I thought and what I looked and hoped for, of friends, of what I was used to like, no, this is him. And if he says it, he means it.
That's great, though. We wish they were faster. We wish they had more expression. They talked more. And what you said reminded me, too, of those, I think Hope mentioned this, the misinterpretation. And I think that was one of my things that I failed with as a wife for many years, was taking those innocent behaviors and misinterpreting them as something they were not. And for me, his lack of emotional expression, the way I did, was, you do not care as much about this. And I think so many times being so offended, like, hey, this is this. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care. And I told myself he didn't care for years and years. And of course, my husband, he's the biggest caring person in the world. But we make those misconceptions, and we also have misconceptions about how they read their husband's behavior. I think you mentioned Larry. Anything for you, Jennifer, come to mind? How you misconstrued or misinterpreted his behavior.
Oh, absolutely. Sadly, I mean, we're 18 years in, but this is still
this morning,
a
whatever
regular
works,
experience for us, for certain. And I was thinking when Kristy was talking that it's what we mentioned earlier, that we all read between the lines, and there are 4 sentences in between our every one. But for my husband, when he says something, he means what he has said. And there is no reading between the lines. There isn't any other expression. But similarly, I am very animated about virtually everything. And he is very steady and very calm. And I also have had to look more carefully at what his eyes are saying, what the rest of his body is saying, and to be okay with that. Take that as the communication that it is, rather than expecting him to mimic my external excitement or how I look at something or my happy dance. His happy dance looks very different than mine, and learning to be okay with that.
Well, that's one thing, like Joe and I, we did a whole episode on the emojis. Because when he once gave me emojis, and I'm like, thank you. Those emojis made my day. So he just throws a couple in because he knows they made me smile. Even though I know he doesn't mean it. He does it. He does it for me. I'm like, look at that. He gave me a smiley face and a heart. I know he means it now.
My husband will send, he does this randomly, but they are 3 words that he will text to me. Hi, period. Love you, period. Now, for a verbal processor, that's not a whole lot. That's not very many
What does he
words,
mean by that?
But it means the world to me.
What's he trying to say?
What he's trying to say is hello and I love you.
But really, I
That's
mean,
it.
is he mad at you? He might be
That
mad.
is it.
He did
But
use
it's come
punctuation.
to mean so much because I know that he stopped in the middle of what he was doing and that he's thinking about me. And those 3 words communicate all I need to know.
How about you, Hope? Anyway, you misinterpreted Larry's behavior as...
Oh, I think
Not
like
what it
one of
was.
the things, like when you mentioned that he's taken time out of his day, one of the things that Larry and I do, because he's a long distance bike rider, he rides all over. And one of the things that he'll do for me is when he gets to his furthest point out, he'll take a photo, snap a photo, and he'll text it to me and say, here's where I'm at, I'm headed home. Just so I know and I don't worry how much longer is he going to be gone. Because, it can take a while to ride 30 miles or it can take a little while for him to be gone. And he knows that after a certain point, I'm going to go, oh, gee, I wonder if he's okay. Because he knows that I will do that. The other thing that I've noticed that I can be a little bit reactionary. And I can just spit out the first thing that comes to my mind, which isn't always the best course of action. And I've learned that because he thinks so much carefully about his responses, if I need to respond to someone else, like not him, in an email, I'll read it to him and say, tell me how this strikes you. Is there any? And sometimes he'll say, that's great. And sometimes he'll respond, I think you might want to moderate that.
But what does he mean by that when he says that?
Yeah, exactly.
Chill out, woman.
Yeah, a little bit. But yeah, he has. Our kids always say that, like, Dad keeps my ups and downs on a much more even keel.
It's so crazy. Anything else you want to add to that, Kristy, about misinterpreting his? You kind of started us off with that, with misinterpreting his reactions as negative.
Right, because and I think, we're still the most newly married, and so I can still remember very, vividly back to our dating days where it was more like he gave me all of his attention. And so now when I don't get it, it's like, but what about me? Do you still love me? Which I know, but I need it affirmed daily.
Do you still love me?
And so, yes, it is by those actions as well.
Does he send you, what do his texts look like if he's going to?
So my favorite is that I will over-text him during the day.
Are you an over-texter, Hope?
Not really, because he's retired. So,
Okay.
So I only text him like when he's gone on his bike rides.
So he's at work, full-time job, right? But he's at his desk. And so I'll message. But then there's days I'll get busy and he'll write to me. How are you doing? You haven't messaged.
Oh.
And that means a lot because so I try to moderate.
Wrong.
I try to also moderate my amount of messages and try to do more lump sums and not, rapid fire. But it does make me feel appreciated that is something important in his day. If I don't message, he'll often leave for work before I'm awake. And if I don't message till noon, he'll message, how are you? Are you okay? What's going on? Send a photo of the girls. And so I'll try to send stuff and include him as much as possible, but at a limit that I'm respecting him at work, but he wants to know I'm doing okay.
Yeah, but the texting is nice for the verbal processing. You can just get it all out, and then he can read it on his own time when he's ready to process it with himself. So, and hopefully, you were married, Kristy, but we all do grow and mature as wives, right? So I can look back at my marriage to certain aha moments when it was like, oh my goodness, I've been such an idiot. I can't believe it. Where you finally go, I get it, And again, I think I still have these moments this morning. But anyone wants to jump in with an aha moment when you realized that you were probably seeing things wrong or...
Yeah, we went through a time, we'd been married about 6 months. And you know how you're not really fighting, you're not full on fighting, you're just irritating one another. It's almost like a little passive aggressive thing where you'll just kind of say something that's a little edgy and then back off. And it's just living together and learning marriage skills as far as communication. It's harder than you think it's going to be. And no matter how long you've dated. And so we went through this time period when we weren't full on fighting. We were just not getting along as well as we should. And he came home from work one day and he sat me down on the couch. And he said, you know what? I sense that, and this was a lot for him because he doesn't verbally process, right? And we sat on the couch and he goes, I sense that we've not been at odds with one another, but we're not where we should be either. And he looked me in the eye and he said, I want you to understand one thing. We are on the same team. I will always be on your team and I will always be your biggest cheerleader, period. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do to even deserve to be married to this guy? But that, honestly, 6 months into our marriage, set the pattern for communication from that point on where I went, he's my cheerleader.
He's not
always. Yep. He's not my enemy. He is my partner. Yep.
That is really good. Not everyone gets to hear that. But I'm glad that your husband did speak up at that moment. How about for you, Jenny? Was there a moment where you God just kind of spoke to your heart okay, yep, I'm reading him wrong.
Absolutely. There have been many. When we got married, we both made an inscription on our wedding bands. And mine is from him is Genesis 2:18, which references that God made for Adam a helper, which I've always loved that verse and always loved that he chose that for me and for us. But as a very outwardly expressive, loud, verbally processing woman, I don't always take seriously enough my role as my husband's helper. So when he's doing something or not doing something that I think he should be doing, or doing something that is bothering me, or I'm annoyed, or for whatever reason just put out, instead of thinking I am called to help him process through a weakness of his, I can get critical of how he's not cutting it for me or for someone else. And so maybe one of the biggest aha moments for me in our 18 years of marriage is that God has designed me and called me to be his in particular helper, not his teacher, not his critiquer, not the person who gives him the checklist and tells him he needs to get all of these things done the way I would do for myself, but that I am called to come alongside him and to see him as God sees him and to offer what I have as a means of help rather than telling him how he's missed the mark. And that has taken a lot of years to come to that. I wish I had learned that a lot sooner, but I would say that's probably my biggest aha moment, is that God has designed me, called me, and equipped me as his helper and not as his teacher.
That's a good one. That's a hard one. How about you, Kristy? Anything when you kind of had your aha moment? Or maybe you had one recently because you're still young.
No, listening between the two of you, it's been interesting to think through that. And I think one thing that comes to mind is, as I'm the communicator in our relationship, I very much kind of keep us in check as we go. But if we're in conflict and I'm the communicator, that I'm waiting for him to keep us in check, right? Or I want him to step up. And so there's times where I have to kind of go, all right, is that more important than us being on the same team, you know, and so that's something I've worked through. And one thing I do appreciate about him is if we do have any kind of conflict, he will come to me within that day and say, okay, I see what you mean, or I'm sorry. And that's something I really appreciate about him that helps me go, it's not me versus him. It's us. And I need to decide, is this a topic I need to process that's with us, or is this a topic where I'm hurt? And to bring that to just be like, okay, this is going on. I need to wrap my brain around it. I know we don't see it the same. How can we talk about it? How, you know, and I kind of become the processor again, but also going, I'm hurt, but I know you love me. How can we move forward with that? And so one thing I've learned to do is there's times where maybe he's having an issue, but I'm not on the same page with him. And I have to just start asking those questions very neutral to help build him up, because I am the most important person and he is the most important to me. And I want him built up, you know, but like you said, there's that list and there's those things, and I can build him up, and I can also pull that away, you know, and it's a delicate thing where I think I'm appreciating more my role as we go on in marriage of being that person closest to him who has the most power to encourage him and see him grow.
Well, that'd be, I guess, a basic blanket challenge for us ladies, especially who have a lot of words. How many of our words are truly building him up, and how many are subtly, passive-aggressively tearing him down, questioning, why are you doing it that way? That's not the way I would do it. I'm not sure. Explain to me more. And so in our minds, we're going, I gave you a lot of compliments all day long, but like there were so many other words on top that felt critical that he's going, I'm still hearing the first critical sentences you spoke with.
And that's something I've been working on, is how I say it, right? Because even just now you said it in two different ways, and I'm trying really hard to be like, well, why are you doing that? Instead it's, can you tell me your thought process and how you got there? Because I know we're different. And if I can hear his thought process there, then I'm also remembering how he thinks, right? And then reminding myself I think different, but there's so much value in hearing how he got to that point.
I love that you brought up conflict, because I think these things show up when we're in conflict. And I thought that, you know, for me, I want to verbally process it. We can figure it out. I'm going to process it verbally with you in the moment. And I think one of my biggest aha moments was, you know, in my mind, of course, we're having conflict. The end goal for me often is, will he apologize and realize that he's wrong? You know, that's the end goal. And so we'll keep talking until we get there. And what I realized was that if that's my end goal, me talking at him does not get us anywhere closer to, well, the real goal, which is, you know, reconciliation and unity and peace and all that. But I did realize that if I give him time to internally process, the chances of him realizing he was wrong are much higher. I mean, this is like the aha moment. Is this appropriate? But I think there's a truth to that, like, you know, just letting it breathe. And it's almost like me telling him, you should be sorry, versus like, hey, honey, here's where I'm at. We can let the situation breathe. And then he might, again, after a few minutes, like, oh yeah, I understand why you took offense to that, or I understand why that might have bothered you. Versus me telling him over and over and over again, this is why it bothered me, this is why it bothered me. So I don't know if you have any other experiences with conflict and talking.
We had an experience. We attended a marriage conference. We go every now and again, and we attended one a few years ago. And the main teaching that still sticks with me in this moment, even as we're talking, is what one of the speakers said. When one of you wins, you both lose. And I remember sitting back and thinking to myself, wait, say that again? Wait, when one of you wins, you both lose. Because it's like what you said, Tara, I want to win. I want my point to come across, and I want you to hear me. And at the end of the sentence, I want you to apologize. But the truth is, if marriage is about building one another and gathering closer together to God and then to each other, then we lose every time we're trying to prove our point. We lose every time that we feel like we've won.
Because then my husband's smart. Again, he means what it says. So he knows that you're using your words to defeat me. So
exactly. Yes.
I'm checking out. Versus if I leave him alone, like I'll process the situation myself and figure out, you know, my role, et cetera, et cetera. How about you, Hope?
I think it's interesting. Like, one of the sources of conflict, I think, has been that I want Larry to almost be me. I want him
It'd be so much
to,
easier.
Yeah, I'm like, look, like I'm very adventurous when it comes to food. You know, he can order the same thing for the past 36 years at the restaurant. He's like, why would I want to try something new? Because I know I like this. But if I order something different, I may not like it. And I'm like, well, that's the
We're all
whole
nodding.
reason to like go out is to try new foods. And he hates it so much. And I would get so irritated with him. And I'd be almost like going, honey, look at this. Don't you think you want to try that? I think you want to try that. And he's like, well, just let me order what I want to. And it's the same thing like she talked about her husband being in the back. When I first met Larry and like he took me to his church, that's when I knew, like that's when we passed that threshold where he was like, okay, this is more than friendship.
We're going to church.
And yeah, so then he took me to church to meet his church people. That was big. He sat in the back running the sound, 500 people in the congregation. I said, this is a nice sized church. How many people do you know? And he said, 3. I was like, what is wrong with you? And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna deal with this. The man knows 3 people. I introduced myself to 20 people
in one
just
night.
that first day. I felt like we were besties by the time we left. And so we got married, I think probably 8 months after we first visited the church together. And the first thing I did was to sign him up without his knowledge to write and produce the Christmas play for the youth department because I thought it would be so much fun.
Yes, that sounds like a lot of fun.
For a words person.
Look, I already had ideas. He just needed to move with my agenda. And I didn't even check with the poor man. And it's a family joke to this day.
What'd you sign me up for?
I'll never forget the look in his eyes when I was like, so we're going to do this thing. It's going to be really fun. He's learned along the way, when I say we're going to do this thing and it's going to be really fun, it's probably something I volunteered him for and just really not asked him in the first place.
I have volunteered my husband for things that he did not get on board with either.
Yeah.
Right away. But to me, I'm like, I'm being a favor. It's going to be fun.
But we
I'm
did
just
it, and it
helping.
was fun.
Yes,
It
just
was
helping.
fun. We did it. It was a lot of fun.
I love what you mentioned about the food, and it goes back to the steadiness. Because same
Yes.
thing, my husband can order the same thing, and even wear the same shirt. If the shirt looks good on him,
Yes.
why risk it with like an outfit that may not work? I know the shirt works. Let's wear it.
Look, it's when they put something on and go, I've had this shirt since high school. I'm like, yes, you have. And I thought I'd burned it long ago.
Your husband does that too? Oh my goodness. We have a whole closet full of things he had in high school.
Oh, my word.
But the style's come back around now, so it's all good.
I know. I kind of actually tell myself my husband is a simple man, but I think what's cool about this, and it can maybe kind of move into like what we love about them, is he's easy to please that way. Again, it's like I know I go to this restaurant, this dish will make me happy. And for me, I'm like, well, I'm not sure if that dish will make me happy or not. I may not like it, And so I overthink and I'm kind of bored of this dress. So let's go back to Goodwill and buy some new ones where he's like, the other one was perfectly fine. And we also have a simple man story besides the food. And your husband is easy in the wardrobe too. Is he easy to please?
Oh yeah. He'll wear the same things and he's just content with it. I mean, and it's one of those where I'm like, but I'd like to see something new. So my one of my love languages is kind of gifts for other people, and so when I buy him things, I'm saying I love you, like that message you said, hi, I love you, and he's like, but I have other stuff, and so that's always a fun thing for us when I'm like, what about this shirt, and then.
Well, I think that's where we've grown in grace and all that. He understands too that okay, me adding variety to his life is part of the way I am. He's learned to say, you know what? I understand that you want variety in our meals, variety in how we pillows on the couch, variety in this, variety in the food. I don't need all that stuff, but if it's important to you, I will, accommodate that. But understanding too, I think for me, the biggest thing was that that's the way he is. And that's what makes him happy. And I'm like, if I don't want to steal his happiness, if changing his shirt, 30 times in a month and just having all that stuff would not make him happy, then how am I loving him well by making him be like me? But I think to myself, if he'd be like me, he'd be, happier. But it turns out he's happy the way he is.
Amazing.
Go figure.
We have it took us a lot of years to figure this out, but birthday celebrations is an area where we have discovered our differences. This won't come as a surprise to you, but I love a birthday celebration that lasts the entire month long. And I love to have the more people, the merrier, a big party, lots of great food, all of it. I wanted all of it, balloons, the confetti, all of it. Just so much fun. My husband is very content to have the four of us sitting at a table, have a meal together. Maybe we'll go out to dinner. And for a lot of years, I used to ask him what he wanted for his birthday. And he would say, I'd just like to have dinner at home. I'd like to make dinner. I'd like to, and he wants to make it because he loves to cook. And I would ask him the between the lines question, are you sure that's what you want? You really want that? Do you feel like that's a celebration of your birthday? Really? Because I'm struggling to see how that's a celebration. But it is for him because he wants that quiet, slower, uninterrupted space for us to be able to share time together. And so for him, that is the best birthday celebration ever. And I've had to step back and accept that that's like what you said about Joe. That's who he is. And so if I want to genuinely celebrate his birthday or Father's Day or whatever celebration is in front of us, to celebrate it the way that he likes to be celebrated without questioning whether it's right.
And believing him when he says.
Believing him when he says it. He really means that. There's no, I wish she would figure out that I actually love a surprise party. That's never going to happen because he doesn't. I do, but he doesn't.
We've had times where for Joe's birthday, he'll say, honey, this is just all I want. You know, like we can have grilled cheese sandwiches at home. That would be fantastic. I'm like, that sounds really boring. Really? And then sometimes like, do you want a party? He's like, well, honey, if you want to throw a party for me, we can do that for you. Like, obviously, that would make you happy. So here he is, you know, serving me, saying, well, if you want to celebrate my birthday that way, go for it.
The thing is, though, after they agree to a party, and your next question is, what kind of a theme would you like for your party?
I don't care.
And they're like, they look at you like a deer in headlights and go, theme? Does it need to have a theme? And you're like, yes, it does.
Whatever you want, honey.
Can we go back to the quiet dinner?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So to kind of wrap our conversation up, I think we have had plenty of very good, helpful tips. Even myself today, I'm like, that's a good one. I'm gonna hold on to that. How would you describe how God worked in your heart in offering grace? I think I'm landing on grace here because I feel like I always have a hard time giving him grace. Again, why aren't you this way? Why aren't you that way? You're saying this instead of saying, you know what? This is who he is. I love him as he is. And to me, to love him well, what does that look like for you? Everyone's jumping in for learning how to love him well or offer grace, either of those kind of avenues. Oh no, this is weird. Is it quiet?
It's quiet.
It's a quiet moment. I'll go because I hate quiet silences.
We're thinking.
I think one of the things that I had to learn is that it was okay that Larry was different than I was, because ultimately that's what attracts us to our partner is those differences. And sort of resting in those differences rather than thinking, if I could just get him to change this, it would be so much better. And when you stop trying to change your spouse, it allows you that space to really, truly appreciate what they bring to the table. One of the things that I've always told Larry, well, two things. One was when I first met him 42 years ago now, and that seems like a long time ago. I went home and I told my mom, I said, I just met the nicest guy I've ever met. And I still say that about him 42 years later. He's the nicest guy I have ever met. And I remind myself of that statement in those times when I'm like, oh my goodness, how could he possibly not want to do whatever it is that I want to do? And so just resting in those differences and realizing that he brings a wealth to this relationship that I could not possibly. And one of those things is that when I mess up, he never, ever gets mad and screams, ever. And whereas I would, I know I would react, I would overreact. And if I told him, I said, I knew, like I had wrecked the car once, this was years ago, and I had to call him and say, hi, I had a little fender bender. It was a little more than a little fender bender. It was over $1,000 worth of damage. He got there and he immediately said, it's okay, honey, we're going to fix this. This is what insurance is for. You're going to be fine. You're okay. That's the most important thing. And that's how he has reacted consistently through the last 36 years. And giving thanks for that, I think is a super important way that I honor him and bring that grace into the marriage.
I love that.
That is so beautiful, Hope. I could say ditto to all of the above as well. I was thinking about how earlier on in our marriage, we had a lot of conflict, and we still do have. I mean, we're two humans married to each other, so we do still have conflict. But back then, that felt deeply threatening to me, like somehow we were getting it wrong, or that we were in danger of joining the statistics. And grace has taught me, as well as conversations like this, that conflict is normal because we're two human beings. But what God does in the midst of that conflict is extraordinary. When two people have a point to prove or a ground to stand on, can step back and begin to see the other person the way that God sees that person, that is nothing less than miraculous grace. And so what seemed threatening then, I realize it's part of how God has given us space to become more like him, to care for one another when we don't feel like it, to try to understand one another when we're deeply confused, to accept one another when we are so very different from each other, and not to allow that to be something that's threatening, but to actually invite God to use that to strengthen what God already knows is a good thing, right? He stood with us when we said, I do, and he stands with us as we choose to say, I will. And some days it's harder to do that than other days. But I think that's the beauty of God's redemptive and restorative grace in marriage, and why marriage is worth fighting for. It's worth working for.
Well, I think for me, I think where God has been gracious to me is along those moments to see those things. Again, I could spend 5 years going, I just wish he was more excitable, or whatever. And then there's those moments where life feels a little bit overwhelming and I'm kind of a mess. And he's just sitting there like, again, like you mentioned, babe, it's going to be okay. And I'm like, I am so glad that Joe is not equally as freaky outy as I am, because I just like, no matter what happens, he's not going to freak out. And again, as much as I'm like, complain about that, sometimes I'm like, just break out a little bit. There's an element of that steadiness and that kindness that when I've seen it, when it matters to me, I'm like, this is worth gold, right? I wouldn't trade this anything in the world for all the emojis in the world. Say, he is going to be steady when I need him. He's going to be that rock when I need him to be. So I think when God gives us those glimpses of saying, see, this is what I had planned for you. This is why I brought you together. And I'm sure, again, my husband would say opposite things about me. Like there's times he needs us little chatty people. But that's where I think the grace comes into play, when you see like, yes, like this is actually a gift. It's not a burden. It's not a negative. It's not a criticism. This is a gift to me. How about you, Kristy? How have you learned to show grace?
Well, I would say
learning
that because Greg is so stable, it's allowed me to be more silly, more goofy with our daughters, right? Like, or to not worry. I mean, we recently went somewhere and we were outdoors the whole day and I thought it was going to rain. And the whole time I'm checking my phone. I'm like, it's going to rain on us. And he's like, it's okay. Don't worry. And that's something he says to me all the time, like, don't worry. And so it's helping me remember, who am I trusting? Am I trusting the weather, or am I trusting God to just, and I did pray that day. I'm like, please don't rain. And it just sprinkled and it was fine. Right. But I can get worked up. And because he's calm, he balances me out in the same way. He will thank me for being talkative, that when we go to a party, he doesn't have to talk to people. He's so grateful. And it makes me feel very validated in our relationship that is something huge that I bring, that I sometimes see as too much, right? But he sees as that balance that we have. And I enjoy that. And I am very grateful for that. And I love to also talk about him in front of our kids and be like, your dad is so, he's so humble, look how dad is so humble. And I like to say that in front of them. Or your dad's so smart. You can quiz them. You can stop him anytime and be like, tell me about your dad. Because I want to speak his words of affirmation.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's not mine. And so trying to do that in front of our kids, I want them to think he's the greatest man ever, because to them, he's their daddy. And it just reminds me too what I love about him, and that I feel so lucky to be married to him. And that's something, we try to acknowledge and remember, because it's many years, and you want to be grateful and happy and be thankful for that person.
It's easy to, again, especially early on, just again, that resentment grow and that negative mindset grow versus early on going, nope, I'm not going to go down that road. I'm going to use this, for grace. Now, we're not talking about our husbands aren't here in the room to share, but has your husband helped you in this journey to show grace to him, feedback? I know sometimes my husband's, again, he says what he means. Honey, I think you're not doing this. I think, and there's times I'm like, yes, you're right. Like, honey, I think, like the words thing. Sometimes Joe's like, okay, I love listening to you talk, but this is about how much time, attention span I have. So can we work within that span? And I'm like, okay, he's telling me what he needs and I can work within that. Is your husband's helped you in growing in grace?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Larry has learned is, rather than asking me to brief what I'm saying, one of the first questions he asks me when I sit down and say, I need to talk to you about something, he'll say, are you looking for my input? Are you looking for solutions? Do you want me to fix something, to help you through this? Or do you just want me to listen? Because then he knows the scope of the conversation, because sometimes I just need to emote. And he has figured that out. So he has allowed me to grow in the grace also of giving him the same courtesy and saying, is there something more is there a different way I should phrase this? Is the way I phrased it, is it irritating you? Is it upsetting to you? Is it, triggering something that is, not good for you? It's because I've learned, I need to moderate the way I say things, because sometimes it just doesn't, I don't mean for it to come across me, but it comes across not so nice.
You need to moderate that, Hope.
I do. We've learned key words after all these years, but we've learned to respect one another and to know this is how I respond in order to get what I want, because what you want is resolution. What you want is to move forward. What you want is a commonality of goals and a commonality of values. And if you want those things, you got to work for them, and you got to learn how to say it in a way that your partner is going to respond to it.
I like that when our husbands are straightforward like that you can go, okay, I think I'm going to take that and I'll moderate best I can, best I can. How about you, Jennifer? Has your husband helped you growing in grace towards him?
Immensely. Yes, is the answer to that. 10 plus. I would say he is a man who is very quick to forgive. Hope you talked about that when you had your accident, and immediately I had several memories that came to mind of times where I would have absolutely freaked out. But he, in his very calm and steady demeanor, looked at me, held me, hugged me, knew I needed that physical assurance that he loved me, and said, it's going to be okay. This is going to be fine. It's not as big a deal as you feel like it is right now.
We get to hear that a lot.
It really is. When I was first pregnant with our first child, we didn't know the gender of our child, and we chose not to know. And I remember a friend asking me, do you want a boy or a girl? And I remembered saying to her, I hope we have a boy, because I want him to be just like my husband. And we have that boy. We have two boys, two incredible boys. And our eldest is very much like my husband. And in the stuff of marriage, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of this person you fell in love with and made a commitment to love no matter what. But more recently, as I've watched our older son move into some other opportunities that are very similar to his dad, my husband, I come to a new appreciation for the gift that God has given me in my husband as I watch my son become the man that God's creating him to be. And part of that is being quick to forgive and to let things go rather than getting all amped up about it, because it really, at the end of the day, most of those things really don't matter.
It's very true. So to wrap up, we're just going to kind of go back in time And we're going to talk to our younger selves, depending on how long ago that was, different numbers in this room. But to a younger wife in our shoes, maybe who's feeling that tension and frustration of a man who's just not giving her as much verbal everything. And if you could whisper in her ear, the young bride's going, "What's wrong with my husband?" Again, like you mentioned, what's wrong with him? What do you think you most could have heard at that moment that would have helped you stay on the right path for those listening? And we all need to hear this anyhow. We've said a bunch of things, but if anything pops up that we haven't mentioned of advice to young wives married to quiet husbands.
I'd say sometimes there's things I need to discuss with my mom instead, so I've learned
a great one.
As long as it's not our marriage, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a thing in our, I'll call her if I've got to discuss something and she'll listen for an hour. And then I might, run it by my husband later and be like, well, what do you think about this? Cause I've already processed it. And I'll be like, yeah, I think you should, or, you shouldn't. And then I've had more time and I'll be like, okay. But I think the advice I'd also give is if he says something, don't say, are you sure? Do you want the big party? Do you not? Yes. Are you sure? But then he's like, why? So I think both ways, if it's something not related to us, talk to somebody else. Save him the trouble. And if he says something, he means it. So to fully do that, because then I'm questioning him, even though I don't mean to. I love him and I trust him. I said that. I do. And yet I will push back on those. And so I would definitely tell my younger self, just slow it down, maybe ask questions how we got there, find out how he's thinking instead of wondering if it's right or wrong.
I think that's fabulous, though. I think when we first got married, because we were like best friends and we did talk a lot, to say Joe would be my only outlet for talking, not healthy. Your mom, daughter, sister, best friend, you have to spread the words out. You can't save them all for your husband. He cannot have capacity for that. I love that. Some conversations, just call your mom. Yeah.
And also one thing we did is we've set, boundaries in the sense of like, okay, let's not start a very big discussion after 10 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. It's not a good idea. Or even 9:30, right? And so those things are good too, that I wish we kind of done a little sooner. I think we would have gotten more sleep. But having that, those things talked about early, that it's not me versus you. This is us. We have a lot of life things like sleep that we need to help us the next day, that it's okay. It doesn't have to be resolved that evening. And I'm someone that wants to go to sleep happy and that can't be resolved in 5 minutes. So
how about you, Jennifer? What would you say to your younger wife self?
I would say two things. Don't sweat the small stuff, which is a colloquialism but I mean that sincerely.
We sweat easily here.
We do. We do. It's because we have so many words. It allows us to get all worked up. But don't sweat the small stuff. Things are not as big as you think they are. That's what I would whisper in my ear. And the second would be, remember that he loves Jesus first, and sift everything else you think you're experiencing through that lens. Because when I get off or upset about something, it's usually because I'm not sifting who he is through that lens.
He made him, and who he made him to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be the one to make him into anybody. That's not my job. I said it earlier. I am not called to be his teacher. I am his wife. I am his sister, and we are both children of God. And it's God's job, the Holy Spirit's job, to do that formation. He doesn't need me to do that.
I love that. Hope you have the most years of marriage in this room. So if you can go back,
I do.
1980, somewhere in there.
I have two things that I would tell young brides. One is allow your partner space to, like, physical space. Because we've always told our kids, we're like, you know what, your dad and I have a good marriage because he has his own little office and it has a door. And it's his space. He can put what he wants to in there. I do not clean that space. Not because I couldn't, but because it's his space to go and to, because sometimes people who don't word a lot are introverted by nature, and they can only people so long. And they need to go be someplace where they can be in their own headspace and not have people around. So just space. And if there's no physical space, give them emotional space where, go do something else in the kitchen for an hour or so. Honestly, if your spouse needs space to be alone. It's not because they don't love you, but they need to process, and they have to do that alone.
That's awesome.
And the other thing that I would tell a young married couple is pick your battles carefully. Not everything can be a battle. You got to know the difference between something that you can just let go and something that really has to be dealt with. Because the minute you start making every single little thing a battle, your brain doesn't process when something's super important, because you have elevated all the little stuff up here to great big levels of importance that it does not deserve.
That's awesome. So Hope, if we wanted to see your husband and get a glimpse of what he's like, how can we find out more about your husband? This is me asking you to promote your YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
I want to see this guy.
Oh, so my husband and I have a YouTube channel where we teach people practical frugality skills so they can live the life they want, knowing that their finances are under control. It is under the median, and it's on YouTube.
And I have a feeling with both of you, between the two personalities, it probably is a lot of fun to watch.
It is. Yes, people enjoy it. Like somebody said that last week. They said, "I came for the advice on finances. I stayed for the marriage advice." So there you go.
It works in. I absolutely love it. Kristy, if people want to hear a little bit more about you, where can they find you?
They can find me on the weekends on WCIC midday.
You talk about your husband at all?
Oh, I love sharing stories. Absolutely.
Very good. And Jennifer, we can find you. How can we find more about you and learn more about your family and your ministry?
Well, I have a podcast called Living the Grace Life, where I talk about what it looks like to live grace in the ordinary, everyday moments of life. And my family are definitely the front row pew where we are learning to live the grace life. I'm also a speaker and writer, and you can find me at jennifersakata.com. So I would love to connect with any of your listeners.
I love it. So ladies, thank you so much for chatting with us. I resonate in almost 99% of everything you said. I feel like we could swap husbands and all still be pretty happy. No, that's completely inappropriate, but we are all in process. And I love that there's so much grace for this too, because it's just a daily battle. You need to stop laughing at me. But I like that we have community, though, because I think we can think of any of these issues and go, I'm the only one with a husband who does this. I'm the only, and I think when we share stories together and say, hey, we're not alone, there are other ladies, and again, sometimes the genders are swapped for sure. We have definitely a lot of examples of that. So thank you again for joining me. It has been a ton of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you.
Okay, can we clap?
Yeah.
Okay, we can emote.
We did good, right?
Emoji.
Emoji.
Behind Our Smiles is a Wow God production. Discover more at wowgod.com.